He was 19 years old, living in one of the most dangerous housing projects in America. And in less than a year, he recorded what many consider the greatest rap album ever made. Not the most commercially successful, not the most celebrated at the time, the greatest, period. Illmatic didn't just introduce the world to Nasir Jones. It redefined what hip-hop could be. It proved that one young voice, raw and unfiltered, could capture an entire generation's pain, hunger, and brilliance in just 10 tracks and 39 minutes. Before the platinum plaques, before the feuds, before the fame, there was a teenager from Queensbridge with a notebook full of dreams and a story that needed to be told. This is how Illmatic was made. And this is why, 30 years later, it still hits harder than almost anything else ever recorded. To understand why Illmatic mattered, you have to understand what hip-hop looked like in 1994. The West Coast had taken over. Dr. Dre's The Chronic had dropped in 1992 and shifted the entire axis of the culture. G-Funk was everywhere. Snoop Dogg was a superstar. New York, the birthplace of hip-hop, was searching for its identity. The East Coast needed a voice. It needed something real. Something that felt like the streets, smelled like the streets, and told the truth about what those streets actually cost you. Enter Queensbridge, the largest public housing project in North America, sitting in the shadow of the Manhattan skyline across the East River. This was where Nasir Jones grew up. And in 1994, with the whole culture watching, he stepped into the studio and created something that would not just answer the West Coast. It would transcend the entire conversation. Illmatic wasn't a response. It was a revelation. Nasir Oludara Jones was born on September 14, 1973, in Brooklyn, but raised in Queensbridge houses in Long Island City, Queens. His father, Oludara, was a jazz musician of considerable talent, and that musical DNA ran deep in young Nasir. But the streets ran deep too. Queensbridge in the late 80s and early 90s was a war zone. Crack cocaine had devastated the community. Violence was a daily reality. Nas dropped out of school in the 8th grade. He has spoken openly about how the environment forced you to grow up fast or not grow up at all. But while other kids got lost in that world, Nas was watching, absorbing everything. Writing. His early crew, the Devastatin' Seven, was where he first started rhyming seriously. And a chance encounter with producer Large Professor led to his first recorded verse. Trifle. I shoot slugs from my brain just like a rifle. Stampede the stage. I leave the... That one verse put the entire underground on notice. Rakim heard it. KRS-One heard it. People started asking, who is this kid? But it would be 3 more years before the world got the full picture. The road to Illmatic began with a cosign that money can't buy. MC Search of Third Base had heard the buzz around Nas and became his manager and advocate, helping secure a deal with Columbia Records. But the real magic happened in the studio, and it happened across multiple cities, with some of the most gifted producers of the era all bringing their best work to one young MC from Queens. DJ Premier flew in from Houston via Brooklyn. Pete Rock laid down one track that became iconic. Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest stepped in. Large Professor, who had first recorded Nas years earlier, came back to contribute. And a young producer named DJ Premier later said working on Illmatic felt like being part of something historic even as it was happening. Each producer brought a different texture. Premier's New York sample, One Love, and New York State of Mind had that hard, grimy boom-bap energy. Q-Tip's One Love was soulful and reflective. Pete Rock's The World Is Yours was cinematic. Together, they gave Nas a landscape worthy of his words. And Nas, 19, 20 years old during the sessions, came in prepared. Every time, verses memorized, imagery fully formed. Engineers later recalled how rarely he needed more than a few takes. The words were already there. He had been writing them his entire life. Illmatic dropped on April 19, 1994. The response from the hip-hop community was immediate and almost unanimous. The Source, the most respected hip-hop publication of the era, gave it a rare 5-mic rating, one of only a handful of albums ever to receive that honor. Critics called it a masterpiece. Peers called it the album they wished they had made. But commercially, the numbers told a different story. Illmatic sold modestly by major label standards. It did not debut at number 1. It did not produce a crossover pop hit. By the music industry's conventional metrics, it was not a blockbuster. And yet, something unusual happened. Instead of fading, it grew. People who heard it played it for people who hadn't. It passed hand to hand, dorm room to dorm room, block to block. Word of mouth kept it alive when radio couldn't. Over time, Illmatic became the album everyone in hip-hop claimed as a touchstone. It was the proof of concept, evidence that lyricism, storytelling, and raw authenticity could coexist with incredible production. It changed what rappers thought was possible. 30 years on, the legacy of Illmatic is impossible to overstate. It sits at the top of nearly every serious hip-hop ranking ever compiled. Rolling Stone named it one of the 500 greatest albums of all time, across all genres. The Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Recording Registry in 2020, recognizing it as culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. But the real legacy lives in the artists it inspired. Jay-Z, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, Drake. Every rapper who came after Nas and tried to make something personal, cinematic, and lyrically demanding. They were working in the shadow of Illmatic whether they admitted it or not. Kendrick Lamar has cited Nas directly as one of his primary influences. Jay-Z, despite a famous rivalry with Nas, has acknowledged Illmatic's greatness. And perhaps most telling, the album that outsold Illmatic in 1994 is largely forgotten. The album that barely cracked the charts is still being studied, debated, and played every single day. That is not luck. That is genius. Recognized slowly, then all at once. Here is something most people don't know. Illmatic almost didn't sound like Illmatic. Early in the recording process, Columbia Records pushed for a more commercially accessible direction. Longer album, more tracks, more radio-friendly production. The Suits wanted hits. Nas and MC Serch pushed back. Hard. The decision to keep the album at 10 tracks, 39 minutes of pure, uncompromised music, was a deliberate act of artistic defiance. There were also tracks recorded that didn't make the final cut. One of them, a track called One Love Extended Version, had additional verses that were left off to keep the album lean. Nas later said he wanted every track to feel essential. Nothing filler. Nothing included just to fill space. That ruthless editing, that commitment to quality over quantity, is part of why the album has aged the way it has. There are no skips on Illmatic. Not one. And that wasn't an accident. It was a choice made by a teenager who understood instinctively that a great album is not just about what you put in, it is equally about what you leave out. A 19-year-old kid from Queensbridge walked into a studio in 1994 and recorded one of the most perfect albums in the history of recorded music. No features from established stars. No gimmicks. No compromises. Just truth, set to some of the hardest beats ever assembled. Illmatic is proof that genius doesn't wait for the right moment. It creates the moment. And 3 decades later, every bar on that album still holds up. Every image still burns. That is the mark of something that was never just about its time. It was built to last forever. If this breakdown took you back to 1994, hit that like button and let us know, what is your favorite track on Illmatic?